my channel. Okay, let's get into this one right here. Kanye West said slavery was a choice. Was he right? Well, Kanye got his teeth kicked in about this whole subject. And on my channel, we've been talking about slavery and how you had all these hundreds and hundreds of slave owners in the South and many in the North, right? On this channel, we talked about Anthony Johnson not only being one of the first slave owners in the United States, which was the 13 colonies, right? But he was also black, right? Not only that, it was no such thing as lifetime servitude when Anthony Johnson and these slave owners came to the United States as colonists. And it's interesting that they call this guy a colonist. And they say that he was a slave first and then bought his way to freedom, right? I just haven't found any documentation that he was a slave. I haven't seen it. And also, I haven't seen, my fault. Also, his parents were not slaves, right? They came over here on ships with him. So I don't know how he could be a slave. So these are some of the things that we've talked about before. And look, I'm not claiming to be a historian or I know everything and I'm always right. But what we need to use is common sense. Because what they're telling us in some instances doesn't make any sense about slavery, about racism in those times. We even talked about Jim Crow. It makes no sense. But if you only know one way of what they tell you and you only believe in one thing that they tell you, everything else will line up exactly for them. And what I mean is, if you don't question, well, how could this be? If this happened, what? I'm telling you, man, people are getting dumber and dumber by the damn day, by the year, by the decade. Sometimes you like, wow, these people go to college to be doctors, to be lawyers, to be scientists, but they have absolutely no common sense. When I start to read into the past of the people in the 1600s, 1500s, 1200s, 1800s, they are more literate and more intelligent than the people are today. It's not even close. It's not even close. So yeah, Kanye West was condemned for saying these things. And then he kind of backtracked on what he said. Of course, he backtracked on what he said because he was trying to get a lot of people to think about what they've been told. Right? But the other side comes in where they play this other game. You better step back in line with the other sheep and stop trying to think. Kanye West, these people, when you start to look at these people's genealogy, it's real funny. Their story starts to fall apart about who they are, what they stand for. I'm talking about all these celebrities. Kanye West, his great grandmother, is white. She's from Switzerland on his mother's side. Just found out the other day that 50 Cent, his grandmother is white. Now, people might say, well, they've seen him with a black grandmama. That's up to you. I mean, I don't know who these people he's parading around with, but his grandmother on his mother's side is white. Look it up. I was shocked too. Wasn't something I was looking for. I heard him trolling Diddy the other day, and he started with this, West Indian accent. I was like, well, he's from Jamaican Queens. He might be from Haiti or Jamaica or whatever like that. So I went to go look up his genealogy, and it said his grandmother was white. And I'm like, nah, maybe a mistake. So I typed it up on the internet. I said, if 50 Cent mother white? 50 Cent grandmother, is she white? And it said yes. And it explained everything. And I was like, whoa. That's crazy. I would never think that. So that's just one thing. Genealogy trumps everything. And once you get into genealogy, you start to see that this is the fakest place ever that you're at. Nobody's telling the truth about who's who and what happened. It's all a lie. And guess what? They ain't got to tell you because it's all there. They ain't got to tell you. They trying to make money off this lie. That's what everybody's trying to do. It's a system full of lies. So let's just go back and look at slavery again, because some of the stuff that don't really make sense to me. This guy on the screen is William Ellison Jr. Born December 5th. As April Ellison. I didn't know they called guys April, but I guess they did back then. Was an American cotton gin maker and blacksmith. Wow. In South Carolina, and a former African American slave. Wow, that's a lot of things to be, right? First you said he was an American, now he's an African. No, my fault. He was a former African American slave. Okay. You called him American, and then a former African American slave who achieved success as a slave owner before the American Civil War. Before I tell you, this was one of the richest guys. He was richer than white people. He was rich, rich. He had owned so much land and so many slaves. Success as a slave owner before the American Civil War. He eventually became a major planter and one of the wealthiest property owners in the state. According to the 1860 census, in which his surname was listed as Ellerson, he owned up to 68 black slaves, making him the largest of 171 black slave holders in South Carolina. That's only in South Carolina. In South Carolina was supposedly one of the racist places you can go to back then, wasn't enslaving all these black people. Okay, so again, making him the largest of 100 of the 171 black slave holders in South Carolina. He held 63 slaves at his death and more than 900 acres from 1830 to 1865. He and his sons were the only free blacks in Sumter County, right, to own slaves. The county was largely devoted to cotton plantations, and the majority of the population were slaves. So it might have not even been nobody there but him. He might have owned all the damn land. To say nobody else was there. Ellison and his sons were among a number of successful free people of color in the South. But Ellison's masters had passed on social capital by apprenticing him to learn a valuable art trade as a cotton gin maker, at which Ellison made a success. He took a wife at the age of 21 after buying his own freedom when he was 26. So we're going to get into that later, right? And we keep hearing this stuff. How do slaves buy their freedom? This is, let me see. This is in the, I guess, 1700s. Well, early 1800s. So he bought his freedom. And we're going to hear a lot about this, right? About slaves buying their free. Where do you get the money from? If you're a slave, where do you get the money from? Where do you get your money from? And we're also going to talk about a little later, how were these slaves taking this slave master to court in a racist place? Black people don't have no rights. Where were you getting this money to pay lawyers, pay the court, and even getting to talk to a damn lawyer? You were an African slave from Africa that was captured, beaten, treated like crap. That's what they say in the movie's Roots. That's what they keep trying to tell people. These people had no rights in the South and barely any rights in the North. Again, where were they able to get money if they were slaves? The same money it would cost you to go to court today, it would be the same thing back then. Right? As far as we comparing inflation or whatever like that. You guys got to start asking these questions. It doesn't make any sense what they're trying to tell you. And they will tell you right to your face. And you're like, but Ellison, let me see. Oh, we got to that. After buying his own freedom when he was 26, a few years later, Ellison purchased his wife and their children to protect them from sales as slaves. Okay. The Act of 1820 made it more difficult for slaveholders to make personals. They're talking about manumissions, but Ellison gained freedom for his son, um, and acquiesced freedom for his surviving daughter. During the American Civil War, Ellison and his son supported the Confederate States of America and gave the government donations and aid a lot. A grandson fought with the regular Confederate Army and survived the war. Goodness gracious. I want to get into this guy right a little bit more. William Ellison Jr. was named April by his master. I want you guys to go pull up this guy's genealogy because this guy was never enslaved. He was named April by his master. Okay. When born into slavery about 1790 on a plantation near Winsboro, South Carolina. The name indicated the month he was born. So your slave master names you, not your mama. You got all these damn slaves on the damn plantation, and you can't wait for, that your slave to have a baby so you can name them. This is ridiculous. So you know who they're talking about. His slave master probably was his parents that bought him, or some crazy stuff that just maybe they were born into slavery. I don't know, man. But they'll try to come up with all kind of stuff that doesn't make sense. But when you look, his parents didn't come from Africa, and he wasn't enslaved. But let's keep with the crazy story. Which was a common slave naming practice at the time. In 1800, the man April was documented as owned by William Ellis. you see, this is this guy's real name, William Ellis. But when you go look at his parents, that's his father's name too. And he's got a mom. How is he on a genealogy chart with a slave owner? This makes no sense. You will have no genealogy. You won't even be on the census records if you was a slave. The only way you're gonna be on the census record as a slave if you was on the slave master's census record of him on a slave schedule. That's it. This guy was never on a slave schedule, and he was on the census for his own house, his parents' house. They just be, like I said, once you get into genealogy, it trumps all this fictional nonsense. And that's what I thought. I thought my people were slaves. So when I went to go look it up, they wasn't. They own their own land, and they came from Arkansas, went to Mississippi, own their own land. I ain't trying to say they own slaves. Maybe they did, but I didn't see it. So, anyway, William Ellison apprenticed young April at age 10. So, he's a slave, but he's going to apprentice his slave. You got to remember, this guy's got a daddy, a mama, everything else, but the slave master is going to take it on himself to show this guy how to run this machine, make all this money, and do all this stuff. Not his own children. He ain't going to leave none of this knowledge for us. This is the most ridiculous thing you ever heard, bro. And these are these stories that they try to make up, but they make no sense. Only the stupid people who say, yes, yes, yes. It's ridiculous. William Edison apprenticed young April at age 10 to a cotton gin maker. William, this will provide him with a valuable, highly skilled trade to make a living as an adult. This is a slave. What is he? He took somebody else's children out of this damn slave plantation, and he's trying to help this kid. These people, this is his father. These people they have to talk to you like this because you know nothing about slavery. Zero, nothing. And we're gonna see later on. This will provide him with a valuable, highly skilled trade to make a living as an adult. Cotton gins were in demand to make a good profitable processing of sorting staple cotton. The invention of the cotton gin at the end of the 18th century led to widespread cultivation and short of a short staple of cotton. Blah blah blah. Let me get into this. Um, Let me see. April Ellison completed his apprenticeship after 6 years and continued to work at the shop as a hired hand. A hired hand? I thought he was a slave. Most of his earnings went to his master, as April was a slave who was hired out. But it appears April was allowed to keep portions of his fees, as he later purchased his freedom from Ellison. I'm trying. I didn't pre-read none of this, but I just know what they're gonna say because you read this all the time. Freedom to do what and go where. All black people are supposed to be slaves. Freedom to go where and do what? I don't understand. Um, but it appears April was allowed to keep. It was common practice, according to black codes of the South in Louisiana, to pay slaves for any labor performed on Sunday. And this is a lie. As we get the slave schedules, they was paying these people every single damn day. Not slave schedules, slave payrolls, right? Only only on Sunday. April continued to learn a variety of complex skills related to cotton gin making and repair. He also learned blacksmith. Um, I'm trying. Oh, here we go. They just had a whole bunch of stuff. They're trying to cover up this guy, so they're just like writing what they want to write, right? Because they can't explain how hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of black slave masters owned thousands of slaves during slavery in the South. They can't explain that. After gaining his freedom in 1817, Ellison moved to Sumter County, South Carolina, blah, 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 where he established himself as a cotton gin maker. This area was rapidly being developed. I told you, remember, he had all them slaves and he was the only black person there because it was just him. He had bought all the damn land. They tried to make it look like it wasn't no more black people there. It was just him and a whole bunch of racist white people in Carolina. Man, these people is something else. This area was rapidly being developed for cotton plantations of short staple cotton. At first, he paid for the labor of slave artisans who had been hired out by their masters. Here we go again. You just leaving your master was hired. They were hired out. Okay. Within 2 years, he purchased two artisan slaves to work. Remember, these are the same slaves that got apprenticeships and was taught by their masters to be able to make a whole bunch of money later. This is the most ridiculous thing you ever heard. You would want white people of your own people doing this and learning these skills. You wouldn't want these people. You wouldn't want these people in the field doing the labor work, right? As we're told, they're giving these slaves apprenticeship that you would go to a union and learn apprenticeship and stuff like that and make a whole bunch of money later. This is ridiculous, man. Um, Within 2 years, he purchased two artisan slaves to work on his shop. Um, by 1830, he held four artisan slaves. By 1840, he held a total of 8 slaves who worked in his cotton gin business. Remember, this guy is supposed to be a slave, right? And slavery was all black people. Why is he starting to do this? Why are these black people supposedly running away from slavery or getting their freedom and then slaving other people? But this was bad, right? Um, Let me see. They were both skilled and unskilled. As the latter cut wood from his land, blah, blah, blah. By the 1850s, he also operated a blacksmith shop with artisan slaves. Let me try to get into this, to the meat of this thing. Um, Eventually, Ellison earned enough to buy land, starting with more than 50 acres. By 1850, he had increased his holdings to 386 acres and established his own cotton plantation. By that time, he owned 32 slaves. Let me see here. The Ellison family joined a church. Um, William Ellison was the first free person of color to install a family branch on the first floor of the church. Which, yeah, these black people around here got churches and businesses, and you want to go to a white church? Usually revert. Come on. They're trying to say usually reserved for white families who could afford to pay for a bench and donate to the church. So they're trying to say this church was mixed with black people and white people. That's what they're trying to say. And it was so racist. Him and his family established a family cemetery on their plantation based on transcripts of the gravestones, and his wife. Three generations of descendants, including his sons and his wives, were buried on this property. Blah blah blah. In 1852, Ellison bought Keith Hill and Hickory Hill plantations, bringing his total of land holdings to more than 1,000 acres. Wow. And of course, he got more slaves, 53 slaves. Let me see. He also, yeah, it's just a lot here, man. I'm trying to get, like, let me see. I just want to move on, but you can read this story for yourself. I mean, people have written books on this. This was maybe the wealthiest guy in South Carolina at the time. So let's go to this right here. And this is going back to what I was talking about earlier that makes zero sense at all. Let me see. The decision involved the case of Dred. Hold on, let me pull this up. Let's read this Dred Scott case, because like I said, all these black slaves just had all this money suddenly. Remember, they were captured from Africa, and they were able to take their slave masters to court. Wow. Oh, they got somebody on here. Let me see. Oh, here it is. Talk about this dude, Dred Scott. And this guy, go look up his genealogy. Another European that came from Europe. Another black European. Remember, they're calling all these people African now because this new system, they called nobody African back then. Nobody. And on the census, all this stuff didn't really start coming out until maybe the late 1700s. White, black, colored, Afro-American. Right? So none of these names were back then as far as African and African-American. This is new. So now they're calling people stuff that they weren't back then. And you can see the name changes because they want to keep changing history. In the 1600s, there was no place as Africa. If you go look up Africa, you're going to see what it was called before. And those people on the continent of Africa never called that place Africa. The Europeans named that place Africa. Dred Scott, they say he was born in 1799, was an enslaved African American. How? There was no African Americans back then. A man who, along with his wife, Harriet, unsuccessfully sued for the freedom of themselves and their two daughters in the Dred Scott versus Stanford case of 1857, particularly known as the Dred Scott decision. The Scots claimed that they should be granted freedom because Dred had lived in Illinois in the Wisconsin territory for 4 years where slavery was illegal. The laws in those jurisdictions said that slaveholders gave up their rights to slaves if they stayed for extended period. So I'm not I'm not gonna go too deep into this thing because we all know this. We all know the Dred Scott case. Um, we'll read a little bit of it. In a landmark case, the United States Supreme Court decided 7-2 against Scott, finding that neither he or any other person of African ancestry could claim citizenship of the United States. Okay, that's a lie because there were black citizens at the time back then. As long as a lot of them register land with the government, we told you what register means. You give it away. Now you got to pay taxes on it. But they will give you protections, right? You will get special benefits, right? So many people didn't want that. They felt that they could protect themselves. They didn't want the benefits. They didn't want the land being taxed because once you register and you got to pay taxes on it, and you get behind on the taxes, guess what? Now they start to put penalties on it, and if you don't pay the penalties and pay blah blah blah, now they take it. That's what happened. And we talked about this before. That's why a lot of black people come vote during the Jim Crow because their land wasn't registered with the government, and they didn't want to because they didn't want to pay the taxes because they weren't done back then. They knew if they fell back on it, guess what would happen? They keep charging more fees, and eventually they'll take it. But again, don't worry about that. Martin Luther King registered all black people's land, especially in the South, and they have no more land now. That's what that was about, right? That's what that was about. When they say black people can't vote, that was a lie. If you registered your land, you did certain things like went to school, they did like a literacy test, all kind of different things, right? You had to be a citizen. You had to be a citizen. How about a lot of people? A lot of people back then weren't a citizen of the United States. As long as they didn't register their land, they weren't considered citizens. Even if it passed on to their children, that's a whole different subject. Um, Let me see. And therefore, Scott could not bring suit in federal court under diversity of citizenship rules. Scott temporary uh, residence in free territory outside Missouri did not bring about his emancipation because the Missouri comprised, which made the territory free by prohibiting slavery um, north of the 3630 parallel was unconstitutional because it derived citizens, citizens of their slaves' property without due process of law. Look, we don't really need to get too far into this Dred Scott case. The whole thing with me is how were they getting this money to go to court and sue their slave master? What right did they have to sue a racist slave master that was enslaving them? How the hell did some uneducated slaves know the laws of being taken out of one territory that was free and coming back into another territory? And when what happened? Did they go to the slave master and say, "Look, you took me out of this territory. I need some money because I want to take you to court"? How did they go to the slave master and tell? What are we talking about here? This is like people believing Michael Jackson changed his face 5, 6, 7 times and got these surgeries, instead of figuring out this was a different guy every damn time. But they don't want to realize this because their heart will be broke. That they was lied to by Michael. That they was lied to by the media, right? Everybody will be heartbroken. They just can't take this fake world that they're living in, right? They will tell you somebody could cut off their chin, their cheeks, their nose, their ears, their forehead, and make a whole damn new face 4 or 5 times while bleaching their skin. That's what they will tell you because their heart broke. They don't want to use common sense. They've never been taught none of that. Common sense is free. You don't have to go to school for this stuff. You don't have to be indoctrinated for common sense. It is given to you freely by God. And what did we tell you before? A lie is beautiful. It's lovely. It's joyous. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel free. The truth, woof, don't come near me. The truth is ugly. It don't feel good. It's horrible. Why are you doing this? So what happens? People rather live a lie so they can feel good. Because if they live through the truth, it's ugly. It's nothing to feel good about. We all know what Dred Scott, he ended up getting free after the Civil War was over. And, before that, who is it? The abolitionists. They try to get him free. I want to do a whole video on them. We talked. They were a joke. Abolitionists were a joke. They were running a game. They're kind of like what you call Black Lives Matters right now, right? Those type of people, right? The type of people that say, "Oh, back in the day, women's rights." Well, y'all took women's rights away. How did you got right to speak and do all this stuff, but you say women have no rights? That don't make too much sense to me. How's the government giving you right to speak? So let's move on here. And we might not be able to get into this, but I want you guys to look up slave payrolls, right? And they're gonna make up all kind of lies, like they just did. You heard it right there. They got paid on Sunday, right? Slaves only got paid on Sunday, but this guy freed himself, paid for his own freedom, and became one of the wealthiest guys in the town. And when you hear these stories again, just don't think about one guy, one black guy. Like he was the only black guy around. We're talking about hundreds, hundreds and hundreds, and maybe thousands. Now, am I saying all black people own slaves? No, and all white people didn't own slaves. These were business people who were about making money. That was basically the biggest business back then, farming. So don't forget, most of this farming was going across the world too. America was feeding the world. As soon as the Europeans came over here and made deals with these Indians. So I want you guys to go look up slave payrolls, right? And like I said, they're going to make up all kind of excuses. They're going to say all this stuff. Some of them say, oh, these Confederate slave payrolls. We paid slave soldiers to fight. Oh, no, they didn't. Because they didn't do that. You saw what we were just saying right there with William Ellison. He gave to the Confederate Army to fight in that Civil War. And again, if you think it was just him, no. If you lived in the South, you was a Confederate. Especially if you was free. This was your land. This is where you was born. This is what you represent. Just like if you was in the North, that's what you was representing. We know about that rift. They just don't want you to know that it was free blacks, not only up north, by the tens of thousands, or maybe the hundreds of thousands, but in the South too. They don't want you to know a lot of this stuff because the gig will be up in the United States. Remember, they haven't given one penny to black Americans for slavery. Why? Because the story they're telling you is a bunch of hogwash. It is. Through and through, it's a bunch of hogwash. And only 1.6, what was it? Only 1.6 people of the population was enslaved when the Civil War started. Not a lot. So yeah, go look up slave payrolls and you'll see these people were getting paid. They were getting paid to be slaves, and they were coming from places all over, not only Africa, but Europe, were black people. They were coming into the Americas. Yep, from Spain. The same thing that was going on up here that they're learning about going on down in Latin America. We can do a whole video on that. The same damn thing. A bunch of lies that don't make any sense. Um. Also, what they failed to explain is how did black people back then get on the money on Confederate currency? How did they get on the money in the South? North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, New Orleans, Mississippi. Black people was on the money. They were on the money as farmers. And you know what they'll say now is? They'll say that those are slaves. Those were the white man's slaves that was on the money. Wow. That's what they're saying now. So you put slaves on the money? You gotta be kidding me. You drug some people all the way from Africa, beat them, tortured them, whipped them, did all this stuff, then feed them on the way here, chained up, ain't had an inch of space between all these people on the ship, and you bring them over here to put them on your money? Apprenticeship? Show them how to make money? I tell you, man, it's these stories. So, also, I don't know if we got time, but I want you guys to go back and look at some of this nonsense they're telling you that these people are coming to the United States, or those slave states, as slaves with first and last names. They're coming to the United States to be slaves with first and last names. And some of the story will be, like I heard, the most craziest stuff you ever heard. And people who live in, you know, England and these different places in Europe, they should be like, what the hell are you talking about? But this is the story they give you, right? Whenever you see a slave with a last name. Oh, that came from the slave master family. So you're gonna give these people who you don't know, who you're beating, you're torturing, they're no good, you treat like poop, your family name, your family crest, right? Because all those Europeans that came to America back then, they knew what the family last name was about. It was a family crest, right? Smith, Williams, maybe Davis, whatever it is. Over there in Europe, they knew who those people were, what they did, right? They could have made bottles. They could have made shoes. The Smith family could have made bar stools. That's what that family did. They knew where them people came from, what side of town they were in, who they married, everything. Go look up family crest. You would never give a slave your damn family your surname. You would never give them your surname. That is the most ridiculous thing you ever heard of in your life. And they can only pass that off to black people, really. You had thousands, hundreds, and many slaves, and you gave all these slaves your family name? I don't know about you, but ain't nobody that I know is just going to take my family name. I mean, these people lie so much. And when you look in Europe, you look in France, you look in England, you look in Spain, you look in all them places, black people was running around free. We're artists, we're scientists, we're teachers, we're musicians, we're in political power, all up in Europe in the 14, 15, 16, 1700s. So again, They got a lot of explaining to do. How these people are coming over here on slave ship manifest with first and last names, and it states, are you black, Negro, colored, right? And some of them put what it is. They put black, some of them put Negro, some of them put yellow, and some of them put nothing because they were white. You got to remember, and that's most of your manifest in 1800s, right? When they bring it, remember all this. You can't really catch these people in the lie before the 1800s because over there in Europe they didn't go by color. They went by family crest. Yeah, y'all need to start studying history. They didn't call somebody a color, right? If you lived in England, maybe you was English, but they didn't call you European. You was addressed by your surname, by your family crest, whatever your last name is. I don't know how much time we got on this, but let's get into this. So you can go up and you can look at a list of black slave owners, right? And it will show up category African American slave owners. And the following 36 pages are in this category out of 36 total. And then it says African American slave owners, and it's got them listed from A to B. And it's a lot of them. And they didn't even put all of them in here, but it's just some of them. And we'll get into this. Who is this? Selman Bailey, 1771, was born a former enslaved African American who is best known for his 1821 autobiography entitled A Narrative of Some Remarkable Incidents in Life of Selman Bailey, formerly a slave in the state of Delaware, North America, blah, blah, blah. Let me see. He worked as a farmer and at a sawmill. In their later years, he and his wife emigrated in 1871 to the new colony Liberia, where he worked as a missionary and farmer. His short book about the colony was published, blah, blah, blah. Let me see if I can find this. I'm not going to read all that. But he was a slave owner. I'm not going to go through all that. They're trying to jump through stuff. Antoine Doublet Jr., let me see, born 1887, was a state treasurer Louisiana from 1868 to 1878 before the American Civil War, was one of the wealthiest African Americans in the nation. After the Civil War, he was the first person of African descent to hold office as Louisiana treasurer. Woof. Let me see. Okay, how much time do we got? Not much. So he was born in Louisiana. He was the son of Antoine Doucet Sr. Both were free blacks. His father was part owner of Cedar Grove, a successful sugar plant. He inherited from his parents, Joseph, blah, blah, blah. He's talking about his parents. Upon his father's death, his mother moved to New Orleans with his younger children. They took over his father's responsibilities and assisted in managing the plantation and enslaving more than 70 people. In 1834, the plantation was divided, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you got to go look this up, man. I don't, maybe we'll just do a whole separate piece on this. Let me see. Let me see. Marie Coin, born as Coin with no surname, known as Marie Thésise the Coin, sound like she French or something. Yeah, I think she was a planter, slave owner, and businesswoman at the colonial Louisiana outpost. Whew. Wow. So look, I'm gonna give this to you one more. We probably do a whole do a whole video on this separately. But look up African American slave owners, and it'll say category African American slave owners, and it's in Wikipedia. Okay, go look that up. And it's going to come up with all these names and show you how all these black people was able to get free and own all these slaves, and they were rich in the South. I'm trying to tell you, and all this is just connected to Jim Crow because these people was living it up, right? They was living it up, and the North was not having it. These people was having power in the South, and when the North put that Jim Crow on their butt, and they had to register their land, they wasn't with it. They wasn't allowed to vote or do nothing. We talked about Jim Crow. Jim Crow is some of the fakest stuff you ever know. The way they're telling it, they're not telling it the right way. Let me see if I can find this real quick. Oh, I guess I don't have it. Anyway, this piece on your screen, if you see it, it's talking about how they were calling Thomas Jefferson the Negro president, in that he was getting slave votes, even though slaves weren't supposed to vote, right? So they were calling him. That's how he won the election, and we'll do a whole piece on that next time. But wow, I just don't know too many white people with the name Jefferson, or Washington, or Abraham. But I'll just leave that alone. I'll just leave that alone. So, yeah, you guys tell me what you think, man. We're able to be free and think with our own common sense. These people, and I'm not trying to say it to be like, say black people weren't enslaved and they weren't mistreated. But my whole thing is, once you start to delve deep into this thing, you start to really see what this thing was about. And we told you, nobody was a real slave for the rest of their lives, except for POWs who lost in war or you committed a crime. All these people that was coming to America or the United States on these slave ships, they were coming here as indentured servants. Okay? And they were getting paid for it. And what happened was these slave masters start breaking the laws. And by how? They wasn't paying them what they were supposed to get paid, or they was keeping them longer than what they were supposed to be keeping them. Right? And a lot of times they came over here on contracts and they wasn't fulfilling the contracts. And that's how the whole thing got bad. And if you made enough money when your master was paying you, you could just pay them off. But you were supposed to, be indentured for a certain amount of time and make them a certain amount of money. If you think about it, everybody's a slave now. Everybody's a slave to the system. Those people, you could not come to the United States unless you came through a sponsor back then. And that's what slave masters were, sponsors. Right? They weren't letting you here unless you came through a sponsor. What do you think a sponsor is now through immigration? Slave master too? Indentured servitude, right? But again, the thing was getting out of hand with these slave masters. They weren't abiding by the rules. Remember, money brings greed. Companies and corporations do it every day. But they just can explain to you how all these black people was free in the North and the South, owning slaves, we're rich, we're businessmen, we're scientists, we're chemists, we're inventing stuff, all this stuff. Own all this, they can't explain it to you. And they do explain it to you at the end of the day by not giving you no reparations. That's how. Tell me what you think.
Single food.